used to never believe the Plato story. I thought it was allegory. I thought the Plato story was a metaphor for the control system. The way he could describe the concentric circles, where you had the elites in the center, where you had then you had like the priest class and like the politicians, and then you had like the craftspeople and artisans leading out to the farmers and peasants. And I thought that was a kind of a sly way of describing the pyramid, the pyramid of control, but doing it in terms of concentric circles. And that's how I felt about the Plato story all my life, until researching for my upcoming book, I came across some information that I previously wasn't aware of, that in 2500 BC, basically these islands, well, Ireland anyway, and definitely Orkney, were depopulated for hundreds of years out of the blue. They can't explain why. They say there was probably an economic downturn. Now, you do not have a sterilization of human population in a country, in two countries, because of an economic downturn. There appears to have been something that happened. Now, we do know that there was this area called Doggerland that existed between the north of England and Denmark. Doggerland sunk underneath the sea. And it's always been known that used to be land, because fishermen working out of Humberside and Yorkshire and places like that used to pull up mammoth tusks and reindeer antlers all the time. So it was always known that was land. Now they're finding that just how big it was, just how much of it there was, and how quickly it sunk. Basically, Britain, Ireland, Orkney were connected to Denmark, to France, Spain, and Celt Iberia, which is the Lusitania parts of the Iberian Peninsula, where Portugal and Spain are, which was used to be Lusitania is named after the god Lu. Now, that's interesting in itself, but when I started to look at that first, I said, well, that's kind of interesting. It makes sense that the land was there and did sink. Now, Plato was very specific. He said, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Now, there are areas in the Algarve in southern Portugal that very much fit the description of, the capital of the Atlantic place. Along with that, the mythology is very, very interesting. Irish mythology is full of stories of people and ancestors who are now below the waves and beyond the sea. And then when I started to look into that, we had 2500 BC, a depopulation of Ireland and Orkney. Other factors included as well, basically a desiccation of the Sahara Desert, meaning it went from green foliage to a dead environment as desert very quickly at 2500 BC. The Nile River also seems to have lost a lot of its water volume during 2500 BC, its flow during 2500 BC. Something happened in 2500 BC, and I'm now starting to seriously believe that not only was Atlantis real, that this 2500 BC anomaly describes what Plato was talking about, and that Atlantis was a landmass that stretched from southern Portugal and southern Spain all the way up towards Britain, Ireland, and up as far as Denmark, and maybe into parts of lower Norway. And this is also the area where the megaliths are. This is where they're all concentrated. They're all in that area. There's other things too, like there's linguistic anomalies. You have only phrases that are used in Celt-Iberian languages that are only used in Irish. We have Celt-Iberian mythology talking about their ancestors beyond the sea in the Tin and Gold Islands. Well, the Tin Island is Cornwall, the Gold Island was Ireland. Yeah. It just goes on, and I think this is what Plato was talking about.
So I don't know if you've seen any of Michael Tazarian's work with regards to the origins and oracle theories, with the legends of Atlantis and who resided on Atlantis and who went there. Have you seen any of his work?
I lost you there just after Origins and Oracles.
The Origins, Michael Tazarian's series of Origins and Oracles, and looking into to Atlantis and who resided on Atlantis. Have you looked at anything of that, of what Tazarian's been saying over the years?
Well, I heard his stuff years ago, so I don't really remember what he said about it, but I think it was a similar kind of idea, wasn't it?
It was.
That it was this part of the world was the Atlantis area, and he went into Irish mythology, although his knowledge of Irish mythology is okay. There's other things he could have brought up, but a fair play to him. I think in general he does good work in that kind of stuff. But I think that's definitely it. I think there's definitely something going on there. Now, it gets kind of interesting as well, because I've been spending a lot of time looking at the megaliths here in Sligo, and also particularly the artwork. I've gotten involved with a guy called Jack Roberts, who basically was the father of Irish Neolithic stone artwork, along with a guy called Martin Brennan, who back in the 1970s were like sleeping in these places to try and find astronomical alignments. And there's definitely two distinct phases, and this is really interesting. There's two distinct phases, right? There's the further you go back in time, the more elegant and refined and realistic the artwork is. Like, for instance, the cave drawings in Lecaux in France. They're beautiful renditions of deer, bison, people, landscapes. And then the later Neolithic phase, you have scratches on walls, circles, cross hatches, dots, wavy lines, spirals. At first it seems like they went back in time. Like, they were really good artists at first, and you see this in the megaliths here in Sligo. There's one particular place called Clover Hill, where the older stones in the back of the cairn are actually more elegant than the newer ones in the front. And what happens is, I was thinking about what they so devastated that they had to learn over again. And what I think happened was, they were learning how to encrypt information, not as literal pictures, but as graphics, as logos, as magic symbols. They were developing the idea that you could contain a vast amount of information in a wavy line, a crosshatch, a certain circle. They were developing a form of symbolism and symbology. And this came out of probably a need, a change in their cognition, a change in their brains that changed them from an unconscious people. When I say unconscious, I mean they had like what they call the bush soul. There was only a basic kind of a subconscious soul. And then they were caused by this catastrophe that struck Western Europe. It created basically the ego in order for them to survive. And they had to learn new ways of developing their society. So they moved into a kind of a magical state. Now, when I say a magical state, they were learning how to basically create sigils on these stones. Basically, this rock art is far more than just scratches and dots. It's actually a form of complex language, but it's only known to the ones who understand the conventions of that language. And I think that change, a shift in human cognition in this part of the world, when they stopped building megaliths and they started moving towards individuality, writing, and the idea of a different kind of society that didn't build big stone monuments anymore, happened after this event. They'd lost themselves and they had to rebuild themselves.
So, touching back on Atlantis, who would have resided on Atlantis? Would it be a hierarchy of people? Would it be kind of the peasants of the land? Who would be sort of like the main residents on Atlantis?
A highly civilized culture.
Yeah.
Up there with classical Greece and Rome, but not like classical Greece and Rome. In an Aboriginal culture, an indigenous culture that rose up in Western Europe on this area that now most of it is under the sea, but it wasn't always under the sea, that rose up in this part of Europe independently of anything in the Middle East. It didn't come out of Babylon. It didn't come out of anywhere else in the world. It rose independently of its own development. And it was basically, if you went back then, you would see people if their artwork is anything to go by, they were not dressed in, and their jewellery and so on, they were not dressed in rags or animal skins. These were a cultured, sophisticated people that had a very advanced civilization and a very well organized, and more importantly, it must have been a peaceful culture. In order to see, we only have the stones left. We only have two things left of them: the megaliths and the mythology, and both are extremely beautiful and extremely elegant. And therefore, by using that, I can tell that the people that actually were behind it were beautiful and elegant. They were just like a highly cultured peaceful. From what we can tell, there's very little evidence of warfare. Artistically inclined people who had a very different consciousness than us.
Okay. And what happened? What happened for what do you determine that could have happened to Atlantis for make it now to be this, whether it's a myth, whether it's reality? What happened to Atlantis? Why is it?
I can only go by the evidence, and the evidence suggests the tsunami. Now, what caused that tsunami, I don't know. It may well have been a comet, an asteroid. It could have been anything, but I think it's some kind of cosmic interference. But it definitely, or even an undersea earthquake, but it created an enormous tsunami. The evidence is local around here. There are boulders from under the sea on the side of the mountains. There are large things called shell middens. Some of them are man-made, true, but other ones have vast amounts of shells up on top of hills. They didn't get there by themselves, and they weren't carried up there by people. And they're also types of shells that humans can't eat or don't eat. There's also, if you go to Brittany, like Lac Macquarie, where you have the Grand Menhir of El Gra, which was an 80-foot tall, 360-ton stone that was stood upright 80 feet in the air in Neolithic time. That's been knocked over and smashed facing away from the sea, as if something came in from the sea and knocked it over. There's also islands that have large structures on them that are based out in the middle of the sea. They were once on land. In fact, the whole area around that part of Brittany it's now a bay. It's now the Gulf of Moraband, but that was actually an inland place, and that was flooded during this time. The evidence is there that it was a tsunami. The Isle of Man was connected to Scotland. The Doggerland was connected to England, and so on. So we're definitely dealing with a tsunami. Now, what triggered that tsunami is very interesting. Now, we also have that in the mythology as well. The mythology is very clear. It talks about, in Ireland in particular, there's something called the legend of the Black Pig. And the legend of the Black Pig talks about a giant pig that came from the sea, moved across the land and gouged out all these valleys and destroyed the land, left it poisonous, which was what happens after you have tsunamis, and then was chased back into the sea. And more importantly in the legend, it returns from the sea a second time and comes in and poisons the land again. Now, they're talking an allegory and metaphor of not a pig. They're talking about an extremely dangerous, as far as I'm concerned, tsunami.
Okay. Because there's also been thrown around that the cause of it was a great cataclysm that happened, which ended up causing our astral belt with the planet Tiamat exploding, which was mainly a water-based planet. And this exploded, causing these great floods that then would cause the sinking of Atlantis. Do you buy into this at all? That there was a planet up there called Tiamat?
I think Belakovsky, I think I'm down with that. Yeah, I don't have a problem with anything like that. We know now that the solar system is far more unstable than we used to believe it was, especially after comet Shoemaker-Levy.
Yeah.
Now, we have Jupiter, which is basically the vacuum cleaner of the solar system. When comets come in, like Shoemaker-Levy, Jupiter sucks them all up. It's a vacuum, and the bigger planets, Jupiter and Saturn, generally suck them all up. It shows an intelligence almost as well. They're almost like the gatekeepers of the solar system. And they stop these comets from getting into the inner solar system and causing chaos. Now, sometimes they do get through. In 2009, an enormous asteroid came very close to the Earth, and there was a blackout on all astronomical and space agencies not to talk about it until it passed, because we would have been toast if it had come near us. And it was not reported until, this is 2008, 2009, until it safely passed the Earth, which shows that this threat still exists. We know that comets have hit the Earth, large asteroids do hit the Earth. They do have the comets specifically seem to have a binary function. They not only sterilize, but they also seem to bring new matter and material in as well, this panspermia kind of idea. So yes, I wouldn't be opposed to that. There are stories in particularly the Far Eastern and the Oriental and the Middle Eastern mythology of the planets being in a different place in the sky at one time.
Yeah.
That could account for that. So yeah, I wouldn't be against the idea, but that's still what would cause the tsunamis and so on. Now, there was one story of the planet that was full of water that fell from the sky, and this water is what caused the flood.
Yeah.
I don't buy that one, because this is a biblical idea, and that talks about the idea of the firmament above the earth. And I don't buy anything in literal in the Bible. It's all allegory. It's all story, and quite a lot of it has been rewritten and written over the centuries. That it's been so heavily edited. What's in the Bible today would bear no relationship to what was even in it 1,000 years ago.
No.
So that's a very bad source to go by.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a tsunami caused by some kind of cataclysm that came from space. Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to move on now to the Tarot, and sort of like the history and of the Tarot and how it came into being, and then bring into the magic side of things, Thomas. So you're the one to talk to about Tarot. You're the only person who does my cards every few months. You get a call from me. Thomas, help. Let's talk about the origins of the Tarot.
Well, before we say that, I don't use the tarot for divination.
No.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just don't do it for that reason. I use it for helping people get their minds in focus. I never charge people for it. I always do it for free. And it's just like a conversation with friends and people I like in order to help them work through a problem. Because what the tarot does is, because you're not talking in words or operating in letters and sentences, the images on the tarot directly work with your subconscious mind. They work below the conscious mind, which I spoke about which probably came out about 2500 BC as a result of trauma, and goes directly to the subconscious mind. So you can work out issues down there just like you worked them out in dreams.
Yeah.
Now, the tarot itself is remarkable. Its origins is unknown. It's as simple as that. There's loads of theories it came from Egypt. I don't think so. I mean, some parts of it may have came from Egypt. The stories that it came from the gypsies, I think that's quite plausible. At least the gypsies were almost like carriers of it. They were almost like guardians of the tarot. Maybe it didn't come directly from them. I think the best story I've heard so far is that it originated in a part of northern India on the Pakistani border, and it was brought into Europe by gypsies. Now, these gypsies, because of their migratory nature, they started out in the Indian subcontinent. So that's why you get all these Indian archetypes in there. You get Shiva, you get Krishna as the chariot, you get Kali as the death card, more or less. You get Indra, the god of lightning, in the Tower card. Now, this then moved into the Slavic world, northwards through Russia, and that's when we have the goddess came in. Not sorry, not the goddess, the emperor and the empress, who were distinctly dressed and described as Slavic type tsars, and the influence came in through there, and then it migrated its way down into Italy. By the time it arrived in Italy, about 1500s. The 15th century, it had already been fully developed as an archetypal repository of all the traditions that existed between the Indian subcontinent through the Slavic world and then into European archetypes. It was perfectly matched to actually work across that, which shows that there was almost like an ongoing development of it over that period of time. And that's what makes it so perfect, because literally Indian, Slavic, and European mythology, I'm talking about everything from the Nordics to the Vedas of India to even the tales of the Viking sagas, can be found in the 22 cards of the major arcana. This is remarkable. This is like, there's nothing like this on earth. There's not a book on earth that's developed like this. There's not a tradition on earth that's developed like this. It stands alone. It's almost like the human subconsciousness manifested this thing. I hate to use that word, but like it brought this thing into reality to the point now where it's and has been for a long time, a form of profound analytical psychology contained within 78 cards.
Mm-hmm. And so then through over the years, it's developed into what we know now as the tarot cards?
Well, it's been kind of stable for about 300 years.
Okay.
About 300 years, it's been more or less stable. It hasn't changed really at all. Now, people change the narratives behind it. So you get all these kind of like, you have you have like the classic Marseille Tarot of Marseille. You have Crowley with his Thoth deck. You have the Golden Dawn deck. You have all these magic circles, and you also have Star Wars Tarot, Celtic Tarot, Moon Goddess Tarot, and everything else like this. The Wildwood Tarot is the one I particularly love at the moment. It uses Northern European archetypes and Northwestern European archetypes, and it's very pagan, very heathenistic. And so that's its beauty. That shows you how powerful it is. The fact that it can be adapted to all our mythologies and even our modern pop culture, it can be changed around too. And that's showing it's coming from somewhere very, very deep inside us.
Yeah, because you also now get all these other different cards, don't you? You can go get angel reading cards and all these different type of cards, which have all obviously fallen on the back of the tarot. I mean, I don't know. Someone bought me a deck of these angel cards, but I mean, I don't really get it. You're just supposed to pull one out every day, and it's just got like affirmations on them and things like that. But so many things have come out, spun off from this.
Yeah, I don't know anything about those cards. I don't think how you get anything accurate or meaningful from them, especially if you're just pulling out a card and reading yourself, because your own prejudice is going to
determine.
You're going to lie to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you break up in a relationship and the card comes out and it suggests something that doesn't have to do with getting back with that person or the relationship surviving. And you go, that's what that means. You lie to yourself. That's human nature. That's why you have to have someone else do it for you, because it's like they won't like you.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned Crowley there just a minute ago. Origins of magic. Now we know Crowley used his word magik a lot with Crowley, and he was a Satanist. We know that there is the Church of Satan. I do believe that there's parts of America now that there is an official Church of Satan. I can't remember what town it's in, but there's an official church, the Church of Satan. We know a lot about the elite and what goes on with regards to Bohemian Grove and other retreats across the country with the elite going. And we know also, a lot of these Illuminati pop stars, magic is mentioned during their songs. Let's look at the origins of magic.
Well, firstly, Crowley wasn't a Satanist. Crowley was a Kabbalist.
Okay.
And Crowley came out of a Hermetic group called the Golden Dawn. Now, the Golden Dawn basically did Egyptian magic, Hermetic magic, and William Butler Yeats was also involved in that as well, the poet. Crowley thought that they were playing dopey magic, childlike magic, and so he wanted the real thing. So he became involved in this thing called the Lima, with the Ordo Templis Orientis, which is basically a form of Kabbalism, which is Jewish mysticism.
Okay.
Nothing at all to do with Satanism.
Right, okay.
In fact, Satanism is a very different thing. Now, Satanism is another one that's a lot of people get confused with. The Church of Set of Anton LaVey in California.
That's it, yeah.
That was more like a cult, and it wasn't real Satanism. Real Satanism is a form of nature-based religion. It actually believes that you must be honest in everything you do. So if you hate someone, you tell them you hate them. If you love someone, you tell them you love them. It's almost like I wouldn't be into this myself anyway, because I think humans are far more complex than that. But it's almost like a spiritual version of natural selection. Charles Darwin's natural selection.
Right,
it just
okay.
preaches complete and total directness and honesty.
Okay.
And if you hate someone and you want to kill them, you kill them. Now that's dark end of it. What Anton LaVey did was a kind of a showbiz, silly version of it.
Okay.
It wasn't the real thing. It was more like a thing for him getting laid, picking up people like James Mansfield, and getting money off rich Hollywood people. Very similar to Charles Manson's.
But he does put an association into his stuff with Crowley, doesn't he?
Well, they all do, because Crowley was like along with John Dee, the two most famous people in the history of magic.
Right.
Now, Crowley was an enormous self-publicist, So just about everything he ever said about himself is not true. I mean, in the papers.
Yeah.
Like when he said he was a mountain climber in India, he said he ate the 2 Sherpas to stay alive. That was obviously a lie. That was just part of his publicity. He was the original sort of like publicity hound.
Okay.
And when he had his trial, he bigged it up big time. He called himself, he loved it when the papers called him the most wicked man in the world. Meanwhile, Winston Churchill down the road was the most wicked man in the world, and so on. And so that's what he was about. Now, he was a self-absorbed, nasty piece of work. Any woman that ever came near him was basically destroyed. They basically ended up alcoholics, drug addicts, or suicidal. However, and this is important, he was a brilliant magician. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly how he was doing it. Now, the kind of magic that he was doing, the Lima, it's a very disciplined and difficult system to get into, but it does get results. I mean, Crowley basically invented the 20th century. When you look at music videos on MTV, when you look at marketing and everything else, advertising, it was all, he was there. He was talking about the stuff in the 1920s, that the way to control people is to play on, he was using the same kind of thing as Sigmund Freud and Edward Bernays, is to play on their minds, play on their insecurities, and bring forth a world of free love, free sex, and anything goes. Do what thou wilt. That's the world we live in today, right? That's the world we live in. Now, that's not because he created a magic spell that made people brainwashed. Magic doesn't work like that. Magic is a way of getting inside your head to make you think things in a certain way. It can be a good thing. Magic can be used by an individual to get what they want in life, to overcome insecurities, to overcome problems and so on, to create. It's fantastic for artists. Magic can also be used as black magic. Now, a classic example of black magic would be things like marketing, would be things like making people think they need things which they don't.